My name is Kay Downs with CNN News, and today we have some very special guest stars all the way from Las Vegas, Nevada. None other than the Square Tablers, featuring the mediator, Kendall Ayel, and her guest stars, Runan Singer and Jesse Pata. Now, there will be a lag, girls. I don't know if you can hear me. There will be a lag between what I say and what you say. So if that happens, just keep the flow of the conversation. Now, with that said, girls, welcome to CNN News, and Kendall, it's over to you.
I'm Kendall Eo.
I'm Runan Singer.
I'm Jesse Pata.
And we're doing the reading Segregated Classrooms and Between the World and Me. So the first question is, why did we all choose this reading?
Well, I like both readings. I thought they related to each other a lot. Personally, I related most to the first reading in terms of classrooms being segregated in so-called diverse schools. I feel like that applied both here at UNLV and my experience within public school. And I really enjoyed Between the World and Me because I feel like the flow of it is very poetic, yet it's very true and on the nose, and I just thought that was beautiful. And I thought that when we talk about race, a lot of it has to do with what the different races in our society are conditioned to believe without necessarily knowing that they're conditioned to believe that. And it perpetuates these divisions in society, and I thought this reading really emphasized that.
See, for me, I kind of look at titles and then the first couple of sentences to like catch my eye. And like the world in me, it's like the first sentence is like sun. And then he starts going and like says all of this, like you said, poetic stuff, and I'm like, whoa, this is actually really cool. And like the author is talking about like being in this body, so talking about your physical body and like the spirit, which is really, really cool, and I really relate to that kind of. Or I like find that interesting because that's a good way to look at it. Like you weren't like you didn't decide the body that you were given when you were put into the world, which is really, really cool concept to me. In the segregated classrooms one, it was just like, I think the term is like an oxymoron, where it's like these two things are contradicting, they're opposites, but they're in the same title. Like, what's going on? How do you mean like you're the most diverse school ever, but like you're racist? How did that work?
For me, I think it was important that we chose these because with the Between the World and Me, I think that one's like the most like applicable to this time because these things are happening like today, and it kind of goes with like the Black Lives Matter movement and stuff. And then the segregated classrooms, I think it was interesting how you're like seeing history repeat itself, which is unfortunate, but it's like it's modern day segregation, but it's like you don't really know if they're meaning to do it or if it's just like over time, like we've just like had these like notions of what people are like, so we're like expecting them to do worse when like they have so much potential and stuff. So that's why I think those are important.
We chose the reading on how closely they correlate, the school's discrimination, and then the father's response to it. They are so closely related in the fact that a child may not necessarily understand at first how their color or ethnicity may affect how people treat them. And to be able to see how someone addresses it, whether it's a family life or versus a school district, it's interesting either way, and it's a good comparison to have.
And then the second question is, what are the major identity markers that are addressed in the reading?
Both of them heavily have to do with race, right? And I think the second one, Between the World and Me, it specifically has to do with the divisions between maybe the black race and the white race, although he does bring up different identities, whereas in the first one, multiple races are brought up. So maybe there's a division between like white kids and black and Hispanic kids in that way. So I guess the first one's a little bit more broad in terms of identity, whereas the second one's a little bit more specific, but they fundamentally have to do with the same thing and the same biases that run amok in our culture.
For the first one, I basically said around the same thing, just basically mainly like black and white kids. But for the first one, I said students as like a major
Yeah.
identity too, because like
Yeah.
that's a thing.
I did, yeah, like education level.
It's important. Like it's
Mhm.
important whether these people are adults or if they're like students in like college or high school or middle school, because during those time frames in your life, like society, as you know, is so vastly different.
Mhm.
Like especially for me personally, the change from high school to college was like mind blowing. I was like, oh my goodness, society is so different. It's like, for me, it was less toxic, because in high school it's like, oh well, she's talking about her and he's like gonna fight him. But in college, nobody cares.
Yeah.
Like everybody's too tired, everybody's too stressed out. There's no time for like there's still like mild racism and stuff, and still like contradicting views, but it's not as bad as in high school kind of thing. So like I thought it was important, like these are students who are going through this motion kind of thing.
Yeah, I kind of said that as well, but just like education level and how they mentioned in the segregated classrooms about like that there was more like people of color that got into the Ivy Leagues instead of the white kids. And I think that's an identity marker because like if you only like graduate high school, then like you're seen as less than if like you get your master's or your doctorate. And then with the Between the World and Me, I think another identity marker is the occupation, because they were talking about how the cops, like they get paid and there's no justice. And I think if you have that like, that kind of like security, I think that also like ties into your identity, because even though like you can like clock in and clock out, like technically like that's a part of you, and like if you kill someone, like you can't like erase that, and it's not something that you can just forget and like when you clock out.
Right.
Yeah.
Physical features, occupation, education, these are all important identity markers, but we can't forget someone's personal identity marker. If they believe themselves to be confident, they're going to be confident regardless of skin color.
And then another one is, how do each of you relate to this reading? And if not, what do you think is missing?
So the first one I mentioned earlier off camera, I related to a lot, both in public school and here at UNLV. So in public school, I went to a very so-called diverse school where there was sort of, I guess it was the majority white kids, over like 50-something% or 60-something% white kids, but there were a considerable amount of minorities, more so than specific schools here in the Valley. But there was segregation in the sense where if the higher up you move in advanced classes, the more singular the demographic is, meaning the less diverse the classroom is. So when I would take like maybe AP government or like some honors math or what have you, the majority of students I noticed would be white and Asian students. And there would be a few maybe black students and Hispanic students, although the Asian students and the white students were really the dominant force in those classes. So they were always the students that would participate and, you know, get all the attention from the teachers. Whereas if you go to sort of these normal classes, the dynamic is extremely different. The teacher is less involved. He cares a lot less. He lectures maybe just as well as advanced classes, but it's just not, you could tell that he's just maybe frustrated with students, and the students are there not necessarily to learn or to engage, but it just becomes more of a social thing, and I feel like that's really sad. If I had things my way, all classes would be AP classes, because if you put students all together with the expectation of something, then that's what they're going to be. So if you put a bunch of studious kids with each other, then they're all going to be studious and influence each other. But if you put a bunch of students who feel like school isn't for them and they're not being pushed in the right way, then they're just not. They're just going to think that they're there for whatever reason. Here at UNLV, we've heard the saying that we're extremely diverse, right? We're a very, very diverse campus, but the more I read into it, we have a very small percentage of African American students compared to other races. And also, that diversity that we keep talking about, it's not reflected within our staff. So our professors, the majority of my professors at least, are white and male. And so when I see my professors, or even like the grad students or the PhD students that lead some of my classes, I don't see the diversity in the majority of them. And so I think this reading was really interesting because it reflected on my life a lot, and so I related to it. The second one on Between the World and Me, I might have related to it a little bit less just because I don't have the unique experience of an African American, so I can't necessarily attach it to any part of my life. But I really liked it because it gave sort of
Insight?
yeah, it gave insight, but also it made things make a little bit more sense to me in terms of, you know, I think society likes to focus on what's hopeful, right? Like he brought up the part where, you know, they they put up a picture of like a white kid or like a black kid hugging a police officer, and I'm like, wow. I don't know about that. Like, is this really helpful, or is this like covering something up? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And also, think about it. Do you think black kids in majority black neighborhoods would be comfortable, you know, hugging a police officer? I don't think that reflects reality as much as, you know, as much as we'd want it to. And so I just thought this part, you know, revealing all of the inside stuff that goes into the way we view race and the way we view different races as a component to society, like which race is here to lead things, which race is here to do things for other races. I thought that was really interesting.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, because I'm the white kid in the room, so I'm gonna try. For the first one, I didn't relate to it very much at all, just because in high school I didn't really see like that issue. Because once again, like I'm gonna be the one to say it, like I'm the white person, like I don't automatically recognize like, oh, this room is majority white.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I haven't been like trained by society to do that. I just haven't. And I'm trying to sit here and reflect on it and see, like, I'm thinking, like, yeah, most of my classes in high school were pretty diverse. You had, like, the regular classes, you had honors, and then you had AP. You didn't have any, like, remedial classes or classes where people who couldn't keep up with the normal classes were put into, at least to my knowledge. And I guess if I really wanted to look at it, I could more look at it based on our program areas, because there was definitely like huge, not diversity, but like all the Asian kids would go into like the biomedical program kind of thing. Like that was like a thing. And so like if you look at somebody and you say they're Asian and you're like, oh hey, what's your program area? And they say like, oh, I'm in biomed, you're like, ah, yeah, of course you are.
You're not surprised.
Like yeah, which is so bad, but like that's true. So in that aspect I could see it there.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely see it there.
Oh, can I ask you this? Mm-hmm. So if you were in high school and you asked a African American female what program she's in, and she said, oh, I'm in whatever you just said, how would you have responded? Would you have been surprised?
Me personally, I don't think I would be surprised. Like there might be like a bit of surprise there, because like that's just not a common thing at all. Like most of like the black female students, like most of them were like in culinary or teacher ed or something else besides biomed. So like I think I'd be like mildly surprised, like, oh cool, kind of thing. But it wouldn't be like, oh, you are in biomed kind of thing.
That's interesting, and that's not for like, well, that's for a reason, but in the same time, it's not for a reason, because everyone is capable of anything.
Yeah,
like,
but it's just like we're like,
yeah, every race is capable as any other race. It's just the fact that, you know, the African American students are seen as doing like culinary jobs or like these like sort of whatever kind of.
It was like education, or most of them were in media too.
Yeah, and so it gives you like the idea that maybe like they're being pushed to be in a certain way, and Asian students are being pushed to go a certain way, even though there's no like inherent tendency within these races. So it's just.
But like unfortunately, like it still like happens within our families.
Yeah.
Like I have like a couple Asian friends where like their parents are like, I'm not gonna pay for you to like be a teacher or something. Like you need to like succeed and be like where we're at because we gave you all these resources, so why can't you do it?
Mm-hmm.
Which is unfortunate, but like that's how some people are raised, and like sometimes in like poorer communities, like it's the same thing with them. Like they're just taught like you can't do it, so like you're just gonna like work at a normal place and you're not gonna exceed. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like we're kind of like bred to like think that we can't do things or have to do certain things. So it's unfortunate, but it still happens.
And he talked about that a little bit, right? In Between
Yeah.
the World and Me, he talked about like
Mm-hmm.
certain races having certain roles and
Like you
how
have to
there's
do
how
this.
there's kind of a pushback when we try to break out of those rules because it feels like it's sort of like it's like bothering society
Yeah.
or like ruining the harmony within
Or it's
society
like
or
you're
something.
rebelling when you're
Yeah.
just doing what you want to do.
I mean, they relate to me in the fact that I have black cousins who are adopted by white parents. And it's interesting to see the two sides of the coin where they have to give the same speech that the father gave in the second reading about being black and how they were being segregated against that way. But they also have to give a speech about having white parents themselves, like being white parents that they could be segregated against because they have white parents instead of black parents. Or they may even get some white privilege on the other hand because they have white parents. And it's interesting to see what they have to do in order to explain them to their kids.
So, well, for me, with the relating thing for the first one, I didn't really get it because I was strictly thinking about high school, and I went to like an all-white high school, so there's probably like a handful of brown kids or black kids, and so I didn't really get it because like even in like the normal classes and the higher classes, it's all white kids, so it wasn't like different seeing, like you couldn't like see like any like change because there wasn't like room. So I couldn't really relate to that one, but I was thinking like of like a bigger picture, like so I lived in Colorado, so like there's Denver high schools, which are the city and it's more colored kids, and then I lived in suburbia, which is like all white kids, and whenever like we talked about the Denver schools, like people would just say like they're better at sports and stuff, and it's like, no, they're just as equal as us. You all, like, you just have this notion in your head, and it's sad, but it's like that's how I kind of related to that one, is just like the different schools and areas. And then the Between the World and Me, I kind of thought it was like unfair for me to say I relate because I'm not white, but I'm not black, obviously, so it's like I have these like things in my head that like I know people like have like ideas of and like stereotypes of what I am, but it's like and I've had a talk with my parents like about like you need to be like smart about what you do, but I've never had like to that extent, and I know like I don't personally have to make decisions every day based on like my race because like I think I'm in danger, you know.
That's sad. I just, in the world in me, like, once again, I can't exactly relate. I don't feel like I'm a part of the dream, per se, just because of the whole female appearing, agender identifying, and then LGBT with, like, openly with a female partner. Like, I feel like I'm also kind of, like, shoved out of the dream for those sole purposes, but I don't know what it's like to be constantly in danger or constantly feel threatened. And it reminded me, like, when I was reading through and they were talking about how the people who killed that one guy or like assaulted that one guy like got off scot-free. I was just so like taken aback because like I'm aware that's happening, but it doesn't fully hit me sometimes. Like my assumption is like, yeah, they beat that guy up. It's on camera. They're going to go to jail. But then they don't.
There was a news story
horrible.
that just came out. Okay, I'm using my phone just to like the news story. No, it was okay. So it was a white woman who was shot by a police officer, and that police officer I don't think was white, but he got a bunch of years in prison, and her family was rewarded a bunch of money, which is like starkly different than like all of these other things we're talking about. I wonder if I could find it. I don't know.
that's horrible. Like, I don't know, like, why, well, obviously, it's because I've never had to, like, experience that.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, it just boggles my mind. Like, it's right there on camera. Like, some cases, like, it happened on camera, and it's
No,
like,
yeah.
oh, slap on the wrist. Like, you let those people go back into the world. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Like, whose stupid idea was that to, like, let these
Yeah, like
violent
they had
people
no
go back?
intent to do anything, but
Wow.
you got scared, so you
Yeah.
harmed them.
Okay, I can't find it. There's too many stories about Meghan Markle.
Oh. Just, I don't know. I had to bring that up because I was just reading it like a couple days ago, and like I physically like recoiled. I was like, wait, what? Like,
Yeah.
how it just doesn't make sense in my mind. But I've never been exposed to it, so maybe it makes sense in like their mind because like the author of Between the World and Me was like talking about how like, son, you were raised to think this, you were raised to think that, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like I obviously wasn't. It's scary. It's shocking.
Mm-hmm. And we kind of like answered this, but like, in what ways did you guys learn about others through this reading?
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, you can like take a like, it makes you like try and become like one of them, like think in their like shoes or whatever. But I think that's kind of how I learned about it. But like we're aware, but like we can never know to the full extent what they're
Exactly.
going through.
Like, I don't know, it's just weird to think about because when you think about people, you tend to think that they think like you do. And so
Mhm.
when they do things that you don't understand, you're like, why would you do that? Like, or think in a way that you disagree with, you're sort of dumbfounded as to why they think that way. But really, it's there in specifically maybe African American people, but not only that, but like maybe undocumented immigrants or like all of these different like disenfranchised groups within our society. They all have very unique mindsets that are like they're constantly on edge. It's almost as if someone's like constantly trying to find them and like detain them or be violent towards them, and that's going through life with that kind of mindset. I feel like it's extremely overwhelming, and you're constantly in anxiety because you feel like you're being personally attacked, and that also fundamentally has to do with race. So I have a friend who he's a dreamer, but he's white. He's from Eastern Europe. And so he doesn't have, although he's anxious about his immigration status, he knows that he's not constantly targeted. Or like people aren't gonna look at him and be like, oh, should I call ICE right now? Because he has that like advantage. And so he could like sort of like assimilate within society better. That most dreamers, they don't have that option. And so yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's almost depressing, but you know.
I mean, definitely. Like I wouldn't want to live like that. Cause like, yeah, I have my mental disorders. I have social anxiety and like mild PTSD, like all this stuff. But that doesn't hold a candle. Like I'm still valid, but that doesn't hold a candle to like outwardly, like race-wise. Cause like when somebody can like see you and like see your skin color and then make assumptions based on that, that is like 10 times worse than anything that's happening in here internally. And like, you're right, like people being constantly targeted, people being like constantly looked down upon, or like you don't know if you're gonna walk out and get a comment just because of your skin color, which is something you have no control over. Like in Between the World and Me, it's like you were born with this body, like
you can't change it.
You had no influence. It's not like, oh, I wanted to dye my hair purple and now you're living with that choice, because you made that choice. You like, maybe you were drunk when you made it or something, I don't know, but like you still did it to yourself. When you pop out of the womb, it's like you just deal with the cards that you're given, like, and that's not anybody's fault, which is why racism, like, it just boggles my mind. Because like, why are you judging people based on their skin color?
Yeah.
Like, they didn't ask to be this way. Like, judge people based on their actions, not on like how they look, kind of thing.
Yeah, and you know, it's not that gay people aren't targeted, because there's definitely certain parts of the country or like certain parts of the world that if like a girl is dressed a certain way or if a guy is dressed a certain way, then
they will,
or like
would
even
be
if you're
targeted.
transgender, then yeah, you might be like a victim of a violent attack. But we talked about in class how maybe the worst off person in society is a black woman, more so if you're a lesbian black woman. And so I just think that race is just a whole different thing apart from being gay. Like, they are both targeted, but race specifically is targeted in a certain way that I just feel like.
Because it's also been like, like historically, that was
Yeah.
like the first thing that people targeted was race, because they like chose a group of people and then like we oppressed them.
Yeah.
It was like how like it's hard to get over it when it's literally been our whole history, and like our nation was founded by people that like supported it and like owned slaves and stuff. It's just
It stands out the most, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also like our beauty standards are like based on like
Yeah,
one
like
race. Yeah.
a race. Like the Korean beauty, like they try and be as light as they can. Mm-hmm.
Like they would do like some Asian people would have like that like lid surgery
Yeah.
to make their eyes look.
Like in Korea, I think it's expected that you do have surgery.
No,
Like,
yeah,
kind of
it
thing.
is
Yeah,
like
it's
for
like-
both men
yeah.
and women.
Mhm.
Like
Like if you haven't had it,
It's
like
cool.
there's
It's like
something
a
wrong
trend,
with you
yeah.
kind of thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's sad.
so, do you think there's any practical solutions to any of these problems?
The first one, I'm gonna jump in. I'm sorry. The first one is gonna be with like the principal and stuff, because like the last line of that reading was like she's caught in between a rock and a hard place. Because on one hand, if she doesn't change the leveling system,
All the higher kids.
are gonna leave. But at the same time, if she like doesn't do anything about it, like she still has this big race problem, and how the levels seem unfair.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry, but I say that you should just change the levels. Like in my personal opinion, like even if all those higher up kids, if they leave, there's going to be more students coming. There's going to be more freshmen. There's going to be more students, and then the students who are originally in the lower levels are going to fill the higher levels.
Yeah.
And they're going to be satisfied. So there's still going to be waves of people coming in. So yeah, it might suck for a while,
Mm-hmm.
which with change, somebody's always going to leave.
Mhm.
But then it'll get better.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, we shouldn't be giving any excuses as to, like, segregating students based on race.
Mm-hmm.
If one school, if a bunch of students leave from one school because they started, like, changing the level system, then the new school that they go to should change the level system, and it should just
Exactly.
keep following them.
Mhm.
Like, okay, people will say this is unrealistic, but I believe that every single student, when they're in the right conditions, could be high achievers in like these extremely advanced
No, I
classes.
agree.
Like,
Yeah.
okay, AP classes, they sound so, I don't know, intimidating, but they're not. They're
Mhm.
literally classes that are structured around a certain text you're gonna take, and it's not like advanced learning. You're learning the same thing, but maybe a little bit quicker and with a lot more reading. Any student, I think, could handle that. And I mean, I know there's like personal situations at home, but I just don't think we should
Like hold
even
them to a lower
yeah
standard.
within race, but even education level, I don't think that should be separated. I think
Mhm.
students should be able to be mixed up with certain like levels of studiousness, because
Mhm.
we all influence each other. Like, we don't want to keep perpetuating that certain sort of mentality, like grouping some sort of students with each other and another
Mhm.
sort of student with each other. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I agree. I think if they were held to like the same standard, like they'd be able to achieve the same things. So I think it would be an easy fix. I just think like in their scenario, she's just very scared of losing all the funding and stuff. But it's worth it because it's just modern day segregation.
Yeah, and
So-
it just has to do with your morality, I think.
Yeah, like
Like yeah, it
is
might
it
be
really
hard.
okay for
It
you
might
to
be
just-
yeah, it might be
Yeah.
hard, but what kind of person are you if you just like keep doing this?
Mhm.
Like that
And like
seems
they even
worse.
like they know that the teachers in the lower classes aren't like as good or like trying as hard as the teachers in the higher classes that are for the white kids. So it's like, why can't you at least get like teachers that will like push them and try and build them up instead of just like, this is where you're at, you can't move up.
I also think it has something to do with how we like value education in our country. I think in other countries, although they might not like be as diverse as us, they value their education so much more. I think Clark County specifically, Clark County here, are like ranked like the third worst or something.
Yeah.
The worst or the third worst in the
Yeah.
country. And that's because there's just such little funding
Mhm.
for our schools. Like, I think our funding formula hasn't been updated since 1960 whatever.
Should not be surprised.
I personally learned about some school systems' reactions towards segregation. For the first reading, I didn't like how the principal, of all people, outright claimed conspiracy with some of the other teachers. And I mean, it makes sense if the teacher's on the student side, but the way the principal described it was like a coup instead of a racial issue. It's not the toppling of the government. I didn't like the way the school system went about it, especially the principal.
Yeah, it's true. Like, and even now, like the legislature that are fighting over like how much money the district should be getting, and I think the teachers union and a bunch of teachers are saying, okay, this money you're allocating towards us, you're like 115 million short. We're not going to be able to afford anything unless you give us 115 million more dollars. It's just really messy.
And you can tell because like the kids that I've met here that have gone to school here, some of them are just like, I like did not go to school my whole senior year, and I just had to call myself out, and it's like I didn't know that was possible, but it's just kind of sad that we do that when other people like would kill for our education.
Yeah, and we have this problem where it's like our classes are super full. If you go to an AP class, there's 10 students in there.
No, exactly.
Actually, my AP government class I took senior year was surprisingly full. Like, not to the brim, but like there was easily like 20 students. Like 20 students.
Honestly, AP government is not challenging. At least my class wasn't just. There were kids playing video games in that class.
What's that like? I suffered. But I'm bad at government, so don't ask me how I got into AP. I don't know, but I'm just not great at government.
Can you just choose?
I think so. I can't remember because I know you have to get into honors, but AP, I thought there was something in my school you had to do to get in, but I can't remember because like I said, I blocked out. Most of AP government is just one giant blur. But even that, government's not my strong suit, but I think I wanted to take it to get the edge up in college.
Yeah. In my school, we just chose, I think, but the kids in my school weren't smart. They're just really opinionated.
You're pitching that off camera.
Okay.
Do you think there's any solutions to the between the world and you?
Nothing practical.
No.
I honestly have no idea. I
said social movements.
Yeah, that's
like that's the
just
only
making people work.
conceivable way that I could come up with because like violence doesn't work. It just it doesn't. It just creates a circle and it's gross and toxic and nobody wants it. Social movements are surprisingly effective if you do them correctly. If somebody like messes up and starts using violence within a social movement, it's over. But I watched a video in my my sociology class about a movement in, I can't remember. I think it was somewhere in New York, maybe, who had like a peaceful movement. And at first it was just these college students who wanted to not have segregated like tables, like lunch lines in certain cafes. And so they did like peaceful sit-ins and like walkouts, and like it started with these college students and then moved to like a bigger population, but they were all trained to not use violence. Like they're saying they were like trained, like if you're being harassed, you don't react, you don't do anything. Like they were like dabbing cigarettes on each other's like heads and all that stuff, but they were being trained to not react. And somehow the whole movement was trained like that because it escalated quickly, like in numbers. Nobody reacted violently and they got what they wanted.
I would disagree with that. I think violence can be really effective if it's used strategically. I mean, think about it. Do you think the Russian Revolution would have happened if they didn't like execute the Tsar's family? Or like the French Revolution would have happened if there wasn't like just like a bunch of people inciting violence?
I think it works, but Black people are seen as being violent, so it's like if they do it, like people are just gonna say, "Oh, that's just them being them," but it's like you are not listening.
But then again, if you're just like there and you're just like peacefully talking your mind, who's gonna pay you any attention?
In our society, yes.
Yeah. So like we're an extremely capitalist society. Like our culture is literally capitalism. So maybe there needs to be some destruction of property sometimes in order for people to pay attention.
I mean, as long as nobody's, for me personally, as long as nobody's hurt in this destruction of property, I think it's fair game. Well, I'm very in between as far as violence and peace goes. Like, I try to be the good middle ground, because I get it. Sometimes, like, you gotta, like, shove some people.
Yeah, sometimes you have to throw a rock into a Starbucks.
Exactly, exactly. Like, you know, like, sometimes you have to. But seeking out people and hurting them intentionally for their viewpoints, I'm not about it. Because in that sense, two wrongs don't make a right. property is different. You're not hurting somebody physically when you're damaging their property. Just if they're a wealthy person or something, that's just like, hey, pay attention to me.
Yeah, that's true.
Like big million-dollar companies, million-dollar people.
Or you know what I could also do? So there was the ACT UP movement, right, in the 80s. I think we're going way over time, but anyway,
Yeah,
it was like
we're here now. It's fine.
yeah, it was like so it was like a gay movement that started in Manhattan, and it was like protesting like the government's like responsiveness to the AIDS epidemic and like getting like the kind of medicine they needed, like the AZT, to be like approved by the Food and Drug
Administration.
Yeah. And what they did, they weren't necessarily violent, but they were like, the way they protested was extremely like, and like very gruesome imagery and just very like inappropriate, like almost like
make people
made people uncomfortable. Yeah.
That tactic.
Mm-hmm.
I think like we've tried to make people uncomfortable. It's just like you just have to make people aware.
There is only so much we can do to stop segregation. There's always going to be some form of it, and we can only hope and continue acknowledging its existence. For the second we stop acknowledging its existence is when there will be no more hope. We just have to keep acknowledging its existence, and then maybe we'll be able to get somewhere in the future. We just have to keep going with it.
And it's just like, it's hard to flip people's minds when they've like thought it forever. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, ladies, for having me. I'm honored to be a part of the discussion, but that concludes the end of our program. So, on with the nightly news with Lester Holt.